Hey everyone, welcome to Broadband Deployment News. The NTIA and the Office of Office of Connectivity, Internet, and Growth, an office under the NTIA, has released their 2023 report on activities related to broadband funding. Be right back, and we'll take a quick look at that. Thanks for joining me. Rick Husey here with Broadband Deployment News. So I want to look at this. This is not the report I was kind of waiting for, which talks about how effective these programs have been. This is a report that's required as part of some legislative act that was passed a few years ago, which we'll see here. But this is more about kind of the activities that have taken place to help promote broadband somewhat and how to make things more efficient, but not really the effectiveness yet of broadband being deployed. So we'll see that that's coming later. So I linked to this page. Just want to take a quick look at this and the report, just so you're aware of it. So I linked to this page, and then there's a place where you can download the report here. So you see, I'm just going to scroll through this. You can read through this if you'd like. But I see here in 1998, the U.S. Department of Commerce's National Telecommunications and Information Administration, or the NTIA, identified a persistent digital divide, finding that despite the significant growth in computer ownership and usage, the digital divide between certain groups of Americans had increased between 1994 and 1997. Nearly 30 years later, and when I see the phrase nearly 30 years later and I'm looking at 1998, that makes me feel really old. Look at 98, wow, it's been 30 years, almost 30 years anyway. Nearly 30 years later, the Office of Internet Connectivity and Growth, an office within NTIA, is leading the charge to connect everyone in America to the Internet and close the digital divide. The Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, the IIJA, also known as the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, or Bill, committed $65 billion to bring affordable, reliable, high-speed Internet service to everyone in America. OICG oversees the administration of $48.2 billion of this historic investment, as well as $1.7 billion in broadband programs funded by the Consolidated Appropriations Act of 2021. I can't remember exactly the broadband programs that were in there. I think one was in there, was actually more than this. So I'm thinking maybe that was not included in this $1.7 billion, but there was the emergency connectivity program or something like that. It was a predecessor, I think, even to the emergency broadband benefit, which was a predecessor to the affordable connectivity program. So I remember that, but there was some other, this was basically, the usual Appropriations Act when they try to throw a bunch of stuff into one bill at the end of the year to spend a whole bunch of money. And this was during the COVID years, at the end of the COVID years. So there was a lot of COVID stuff in there, including, like I say, that emergency connectivity program for folks that were maybe having a hard time affording broadband, and some other broadband kind of initiatives in there. So that was one of those everything but the kitchen sink appropriations at the end of that year. So I'm not sure how much of that is still included in this. But then you've got the BEAD program that's in here, but not a lot's happened kind of to prepare the road to kind of get things moving on that. But I mean, here we are years later, and we still are not going to be seeing any deployments on that until the earliest next year, we think. So, things take a long time to move through this process. And a lot of that does have to do with making sure that it's done right. So there's, as I say, there's a lot that has to be done to make sure that we knew, first of all, we knew who had broadband and who didn't, and exactly where. So there was the whole broadband map thing that took forever. And that's now available. But of course, there was iterations of that to make sure that was right. And now there's challenges going on as the states have finished both volumes of their initial proposals for the NTIA, and now they're some have started their challenge processes, some have completed them, some have been approved. Just a few here and there that have been approved. So they're all going through this process. So it's going to be a while. So there's not a lot yet as far as BEAD, as far as broadband funding that has actually taken place. Now, there's other programs that are not part of this, at least not mentioned here. There's the USDA Reconnect. A lot of money's gone out with that. There's ARPA, which was the American Rescue Plan Act. That was a huge program, still is. Still money, I think, left maybe in some capital project funds that could still be released. And there was some other state and local fiscal recovery funds that have been released on that. Lots of money has already been allocated there. Of course, you've got the Connect America Fund, CAF2, and then you've got RDOF, which superseded that. There's been a lot of issues with that, and some of those areas have been pulled off of the map. So there's still things going on with that, but a lot is going on. Not a lot yet with BEAD, though, as far as actually putting broadband on the ground. There's just not been the case. There have been, as far as last mile kinds of projects. So read a little bit about the report here. The Access Broadband Act requires the OICG to submit relevant congressional committees and publish on its website an annual report that contains a description of their work for the previous year and the number of U.S. residents connected to broadband through federal broadband support programs and the Universal Service Fund program, so the USF, which is managed by USAC. So that part of that is not in this report. So what I find would be the really interesting part, which is how have these dollars made a difference as far as actual broadband deployment. We don't have that in this report, but it says here it's coming. The OICG annual report describes this work of the OICG fulfilling statutory requirements of the Access Broadband Act. That was an act that was passed that said the OICG had to do this every year. The 2023 OICG annual report provides an overview of the work accomplished by OICG across its initiatives over the prior calendar years. It administers the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law and the Consolidated Appropriations Act of 2021, federal broadband grant programs. This is the third report prepared under the requirements of the Access Broadband Act. It also mandates that OICG report on how many residents of the United States were provided broadband by which universal service mechanism or which funded broadband support program, and that again would be very interesting, and include an estimate of the economic impact of such broadband deployment efforts on local economies, including any effect on small businesses or jobs. NTIA's forthcoming federal broadband funding report fulfills the remaining Access Broadband Act requirements. So none of that's in this report. So I don't know how interesting it's going to be to you, but I do want to point out that it's here and just show you what's in there. Detailed data on broadband investments made by the FCC and the rest of the federal government will be available in NTIA's forthcoming federal broadband funding report. And again, that will be very interesting because the FCC would include RDOF and CAF2, and then you've got USDA Reconnect should be in there because it says the rest of federal government will be in there. And I'm assuming ARPA, there's a huge amount of money that's been let out with ARPA, American Rescue Plan Act. So hopefully all that will be included along with whatever has gone out with the BEAD program, not really so much the BEAD program, but the other programs in the IIJA or the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, middle mile grant programs, those kinds of things, maybe where some money's already been let out, digital equity kinds of things. I don't know if any of that's been let out yet. This data will also be available as an interactive dashboard on the NTIA's website. Then you can look at the 2022 report. There's a link right here to that if you want to check out and see everything that's in there as far as what had been looked at so far as broadband funding and the results there. So again, I link to this page, and then you can download the report. There's all this stuff. There's a place to download this. Did I pass it? Yep, right here. So if somewhere around the top of the page there, you see download report, and you will then come to this page or to this document, PDF. So you see here, this is the OICG annual report 2023. I was just going to mostly look at what's in the table of contents. It's a long document. You're welcome to read through it. So, and about this report area, you got agency overviews. It talks about the different agency this agency, and their 4 pillars, which are fund broadband infrastructure and digital inclusion efforts, leverage data for decision making. That would be mapping kinds of things, facilitate interagency, state, tribal, and private sector coordination. So there's been a lot of effort and emphasis on local coordination on some of these more recent programs because, I think people realized it's, the knowledge on the ground right there is what's important as far as who has broadband, who doesn't have good broadband, how accurate the data is. So there's a lot of coordination there. Build capacity of communities. So that's the 4th pillar. Then we've got the broadband grant programs. It's a pretty good summary of the different programs. You've got BEAD, Digital Equity Act programs, Middle Mile program, the Tribal Broadband Connectivity program, Broadband Infrastructure program, and again, there's nothing else. There's nothing in here. This was all really supposed to be. I think this was maybe that was the consolidated one. I'm not sure, but all of this is really pretty much, I think, under the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, BEAD being the biggest part of that, and the one that we're mostly talking about, because that's the $42.45 billion that's going to go toward last mile broadband deployment. And that money, states know how much money they have that they're going to be getting on this, and they know approximately where they need to provide that broadband. Like I said, a lot of them are going through the challenge process now to verify the data that they have as far as who does have broadband and who doesn't, and what information is accurate and what information is not. So that process is going on right now. Then they've got the work of the OICG here. They talk a little bit about that. They talk about some of the webinars they've done, program evaluation framework. So again, you can read through this. Interagency coordination. This is important, and it was, again, I think people, eventually people start to realize, wow, there's a lot going on here, and that's one of the problems with government. Is government gets really big, really fast, and then suddenly nobody's talking to each other. So you had all these different agencies, and still do lots. We've got, again, USDA, you've got FCC, you've got the NTIA, all doing these broadband programs. And if there's no coordination, then you wind up duplicating efforts, number one, and maybe duplicating infrastructure, which is even worse. So then you've got funding where you're funding an area that needs broadband, but you've got 2 or 3 agencies doing it instead of just one, and then suddenly you're wasting money. So I think they realized we need to figure out how we can coordinate between the agencies. So it talks about that in here. It talks about mapping. Again, very important, the FCC broadband map, and all that has gone into making that much better than it was a few years ago. People still complain about it, but if you're complaining about it, just look back a few years at what we had. And everything at that point was strictly by census blocks and census block groups. So you could have, you had really no idea what it looked like on the ground as far as which locations had broadband. You only knew that at least one location in a census block had broadband. You didn't know how many, you didn't know which ones. Well, now we're supposed to know every single broadband serviceable location in the United States, whether they have, if they are supposed to get broadband, and if they do have broadband, and what the speed is. And again, it's not completely accurate yet, and there's some questions about whether internet service providers are fudging the numbers to try to get above the thresholds to be served or underserved. But it's much, much better than it was. So we've got that to be thankful for. So again, we've got local coordination, the engagements that states are having to do with stakeholders like maybe tribal groups or different communities, cities, community groups, activist kind of groups, all digital stakeholders there. Talks about leadership networks, intra-agency engagement, and then there's state pages in here. Oh, the Build America, Buy America talks about that. It talks about some of the waivers there. So this was a real concern, still is, but they've really made it a lot better in as far as clarifying what equipment and what materials will be considered that have to be sourced here as far as from an American company, or whether there can be waivers. For example, one good example would be a lot of the fiber equipment that has chips in it. They've said, that you can have waivers for that because those chips make up such a big portion of the amount, as far as the amount of the component. That chip makes such a big portion of that because that's the most expensive thing in there, and we have not yet ramped up to be able to manufacture those chips here. So therefore, there's an exemption there as far as that chip being in there. But still, you want to be able to buy the equipment here. It's just not necessarily that the chip has to be made here. Then we've got state pages. So if you click on that, that'll link you down to a page for each state. So, for example, just click on the first one here, Alabama. It talks a little bit about public engagement, amplifying digital equity and BEAD investments, connecting minority communities through education, future-proofing Alabama with partners. So there's information on the state here. You've got how much they're getting for BEAD, their BEAD planning grant, digital equity planning grant, middle mile program, CMC pilot program. Then you got Alaska, so you got here a state in the South, pretty rural, economically, poor in lots of areas. You've got a state here with very, very spread out. So you've got different states are going to have different challenges. So you can read through those if you like. Again, you got your amount of your award, BEAD planning grant, those kinds of things, middle mile program. So here you got middle mile program for them, 88, almost 89 million. What was Alabama? Alabama middle mile, almost 40 million. So they're going to have a lot more need for middle mile in Alaska. So that's just an example of how things can be a little bit different in the different states. So you can look at that. And then again, there's information on the different tribes down as you get past all the states. Again, you can link from the table of contents, but where am I here? Vermont. Be easier to go up and link the V's. Washington, West Virginia, Wyoming, Washington, D.C. Okay, almost there. So Washington, D.C. expecting to get about 100 million for BEAD, 5 million planning grant, digital equity, no middle mile needed in Washington, D.C. Then you got Puerto Rico, you got your territories right there. Guam, let's take a look at Guam real quick. What do they get? So they've got BEAD program, they're getting 156 million, almost 157 million. And this is the territory split, basically the $5 million dollars there. So that's why they get 1.25 million, and digital equity planning, splitting that 150 million. And the BIP program there for them is listed. North Mariana Islands. So it's going to be the same number there as far as the BEAD stuff. The planning grant 1.25. American Samoa, again, that should be the same there. The one close, 1.244, not sure why. But you can see how much each one of these got for BEAD as well. And then again, we get to the tribal regions and it talks a little bit about each of those. So you got your Alaska, Eastern region, Eastern Oklahoma, Great Plains. So there's quite a few different tribal regions, and you can again go through those or just click through and see those. So Midwest region, for example, there. So that's all I wanted to show you was what's in here, and just let you know that this is available. Again, there's a link to that main page here where you can download that. And then again, coming will be the report that has more information about any funds that have already been let out, and then hopefully again from funding programs that have been letting out money, like ARPA, the Capital Projects Fund, and the state and local fiscal recovery funds from that program, USDA Reconnect, anything RDOF would love to know about that. Any impact, because you hear about, the only thing I'm hearing about right now with RDOF is the stuff that's not getting built. You hear about in a particular area, a service provider that you would have thought would have started building already with the RDOF funds that they got has said, hey, we're not going to build here. So the FCC's been coming out and saying, okay, well, these areas are now going to be back on the map. They're no longer committed funds. So I'd like to hear about some RDOF areas that have been built and some of the impact from that. Maybe CAF 2 as well, if they would go that far back for that program as well. Thanks for joining me today. Appreciate it. If you liked the video, give me a like, give me a thumbs up on that, and subscribe to our channel. Click the subscribe button, ring the bell, and you'll be notified when I'm live. And I will see you next time for Broadband Deployment News. Take care. Bye-bye.